She was sentenced to the electric chair, and the countdown had already begun. Strapped in and seconds from death, a 20-year-old woman whispered just one thing, and everything stopped. The guards froze. The warden hesitated. The governor made a call. They turned the chair off immediately. What did she say, and why was it powerful enough to save her life? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun filtered through the narrow window of Janelle's cell, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. She sat on her bed, counting the hours in her head. 96 left. The number felt both enormous and impossibly small, like trying to hold an ocean in cupped hands. Each tick of the clock was another moment slipping away, another breath closer to the end. When the guard appeared at her door announcing another visitor, Janelle's heart skipped. She didn't recognize the name they mentioned. After so many reporters and activists, each promising help but leaving with only her pain as their story, she'd grown cautious of strangers claiming to want to help. Their words were always the same: sympathy wrapped in curiosity, concern masking their hunger for details. "Do I have to go?" she asked softly, her voice barely disturbing the stale prison air. The words hung between them, fragile as spider silk. The guard's expression remained neutral, professional to the core. "It's your choice. But he says it's important." There was something in the guard's tone, not quite urgency, but a hint that this might be different. Janelle closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of Marcus. His voice seemed to whisper in her ear, the way it often did in her quietest moments. He'd always told her that sometimes the most important moments come disguised as choices we'd rather not make. With a slight nod, she stood, smoothing down her uniform with trembling hands. The fabric felt rough against her palms, a constant reminder of where she was. The walk to the visitation room felt longer than usual, each step heavier than the last. Her prison-issued shoes squeaked against the polished floor, each step echoing in the empty corridor like a countdown. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. When they reached the heavy metal door, Janelle took a deep breath, steadying herself against the wall for just a moment. The cool concrete grounded her, giving her strength. Inside, a man sat at the steel table, his posture rigid but somehow defeated, like a tree that had weathered too many storms. He looked to be in his late 40s, with deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth that spoke of hard years and harder choices. His hands, clasped tightly on the table's surface, showed white knuckles. Something about him tugged at her memory, a familiar feature she couldn't quite place, like a word on the tip of her tongue. The shape of his jaw, perhaps, or the way he held his shoulders. As Janelle sat down across from him, the man's eyes met hers. They were Marcus's eyes. The same warm brown with flecks of gold near the pupil. The same gentle intensity that had always seen straight through to her soul. The recognition hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. "I'm Darius Leonard," he said, his voice rough like sandpaper against wood. "Marcus's father." The air seemed to leave the room, sucked out in an instant. Janelle's fingers gripped the edge of her chair, steadying herself against the shock. She'd never met Marcus's father. He'd been gone long before she came into Marcus's life. The subject had always been too painful for Marcus to discuss at length. A wound he'd learned to live with, but never truly healed. Marcus had mentioned him only in passing, brief comments tinged with old hurt. "I didn't come for you," Darius continued, his words direct but not unkind, just honest in a way that reminded her painfully of his son. "I came for him." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Janelle braced herself, muscles tensing, expecting the anger, the accusations, the pain that had become so familiar from others who didn't understand what love had asked of her. But Darius's next words caught her completely off guard, like stepping onto solid ground when you'd prepared for quicksand. "I came because Marcus wanted your truth to be known." His hand disappeared into his jacket pocket, emerging with a small flash drive. He placed it carefully on the table between them, like he was handling something precious and fragile. A bird's egg or a dying wish. The tiny device gleamed under the harsh lights, unremarkable in appearance but clearly holding something of immense value. "I wasn't there for him," Darius said, his voice catching slightly on the confession. For most of his life, I wasn't there. Pride, stubbornness, fear, take your pick. But a few weeks before, he paused, swallowing hard, Adam's apple bobbing with emotion. A few weeks before the end, he reached out to me. His fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on the table's edge. Janelle stared at the flash drive, her heart pounding against her ribs like it wanted to escape. What's on it? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. Him. Darius's answer was simple, devastating in its brevity. He knew what was coming, knew what he was asking of you. So he recorded a message. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to ensure only she could hear. Made me promise that if you ever needed saving, I'd make sure this got to the right people. The weight of that promise seemed to sit on his shoulders like a physical burden. Tears welled in Janelle's eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. Marcus had thought of everything, had planned so carefully, even in his final days of pain and confusion. Even then, he'd been protecting her. It was so like him, thinking ahead, making contingency plans, always putting her first. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice thin with hope and fear. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Darius's face tightened with regret, the lines deepening like riverbeds. Marcus was specific about when this should be shared. He said, when she has nothing left to lose, when they've taken everything else away, that's when she'll need my voice the most. He shook his head slowly, a sad smile touching his lips. My son. He knew exactly what would happen. There was pride in his voice, mingled with profound sorrow. Janelle's hands trembled as she reached for the flash drive, but a guard stepped forward, shaking his head. That'll need to go through proper channels, ma'am. His tone was firm, but not unkind. Darius straightened in his chair, shoulders squaring with newfound purpose. I've already spoken with her legal team. They're filing a motion to have the video submitted as new evidence. He turned back to Janelle, his expression intense, burning with conviction. I'm not here to judge what happened between you and my son. That's not my place. The words seemed to cost him something to say. He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words, searching for the right way to bridge the gulf between them. Finally, he locked eyes with her, and in that moment, the resemblance to Marcus was almost unbearable, like looking at a preview of what her fiancé might have become with time. The same determined set of the jaw, the same way of tilting his head slightly when saying something important. I didn't come here to forgive you, he said quietly, each word measured. But I believe you loved him. And maybe that matters more than anything else. The simple acknowledgement felt like a gift she hadn't known she needed. Janelle's fingers closed around the flash drive as the guard allowed her to take it, holding it as if it contained Marcus's beating heart. In a way, it did. His voice, his truth, his final gift to her. The weight of it in her palm felt like both anchor and salvation. The plastic was warm against her skin, and she could almost imagine she felt a pulse within it. Marcus's last words, waiting to be heard, waiting to tell their story. The truth they'd shared, the love that had led them both to an impossible choice, was finally going to be known. For the first time in months, Janelle felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Not quite hope, but its fragile beginning. A tiny seed pushing through hard-packed soil, reaching toward light. Janelle's footsteps echoed through the sterile hallway as the guard escorted her to the legal room. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The flash drive felt heavy in her pocket, like it carried the weight of her whole world. Each step brought her closer to hearing a voice she'd thought was silenced forever, a voice that once whispered promises of forever against her ear on quiet nights. The legal room was small and bare, with gray walls that matched the overcast morning visible through the narrow window. A simple table held a monitor, its screen blank and waiting. Sarah Yates sat there, her brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes betraying countless sleepless nights spent on Janelle's case. Her legal pad was covered in scribbled notes and highlighted sections of law, coffee stains marking the corners where her trembling hands had set down her cup too quickly. "Janelle," Sarah said softly, standing to greet her client. Her voice carried warmth despite her obvious exhaustion. "Darius's visit. I heard about the video. Are you ready for this?" She gestured to the chair across from her, her expression gentle but concerned, the lines around her eyes deepening with worry. Janelle's hands trembled as she pulled the flash drive from her pocket. "I don't know," she whispered. "I haven't heard his voice since—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The memory of Marcus's last moments was still too raw, too present. The weight of that night pressed down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe, like trying to inhale underwater. Sarah gently took the drive from Janelle's shaking hands. "We'll go through this together. Take all the time you need." She squeezed Janelle's fingers briefly, a small gesture of support that meant everything in a world where touch had become so rare and precious. The guard positioned himself by the door as Sarah inserted the flash drive into the monitor. For a moment, there was only static, and Janelle held her breath, her lungs burning with anticipation. Then the screen flickered to life and her world stopped spinning. Marcus appeared, sitting in what looked like his old bedroom. The sight of him hit Janelle like a physical blow. He was so thin, his once strong frame diminished by illness, his dark skin ashen beneath the warm brown tones. But his eyes, those warm brown eyes that had always seen straight into her soul, they still held that special light. The light that had guided her through the darkest moments of her life, like stars on a moonless night. "If you're seeing this—" Marcus's voice was weak, barely above a whisper, but clear. He paused, swallowing hard. Then the worst has already happened. His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, each syllable a stone dropping into still water. Janelle pressed her hand to her mouth, tears already flowing down her cheeks like rain. Sarah quietly pushed a box of tissues toward her, her own eyes glistening with emotion she tried to hide behind professional composure, the pen in her hand gripped too tightly. "I need everyone to understand something," Marcus continued, shifting slightly in his chair, wincing at the movement. "What happened? What's happening? It was my choice. My request." He looked directly into the camera, and Janelle felt like he was looking right at her, right through her, the same way he'd looked at her on their first date, seeing parts of her soul she hadn't known existed. "I asked Janelle to help me end my life." The room seemed to grow smaller as Marcus spoke, his words filling every corner like smoke. "The pain. It's not just physical anymore. It's the humiliation of losing control of my own body, the fear of what comes next, watching myself disappear piece by piece." He paused, gathering strength, his chest rising with a labored breath. "But worse than that is seeing the pain in the eyes of those I love, watching them watch me suffer." His voice cracked on the last word, revealing the depth of his anguish, like a fault line opening in solid ground. Janelle couldn't look away from the screen, even as tears blurred her vision, transforming Marcus into a watercolor version of himself. Her chest ached with each breath, a physical pain that mirrored her emotional torment. Sarah was scribbling notes, but Janelle barely registered the sound of pen on paper. All she could see was Marcus. All she could hear was his voice, the voice she'd thought she'd never hear again, the voice that had once sung off-key in the shower just to make her laugh. "I had an advance directive drawn up," Marcus said, fumbling with some papers just off-screen. "I signed it, but honestly, I don't know if it was filed properly. Everything happened so fast at the end." He looked down, then back up, his gaze intense. "But that doesn't change what I wanted. What I asked for." His determination shone through despite his weakened state, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The camera shifted slightly, and for a moment Darius was visible in the background, a silent witness, his own face drawn with the weight of what he was recording. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger despite his obvious fatigue. "Janelle didn't kill me, she saved me. She saved me from being erased, from becoming nothing but pain and fear and regret. She loved me enough to help me leave this world on my own terms." Janelle's hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white, the blood draining away like her hope had done so many months ago. Every word Marcus spoke was like a key turning in a lock, opening doors she'd kept tightly shut since that night. Memories flooded back. His smile, his laugh, the way he'd hold her hand even when the pain was at its worst, the gentle pressure of his fingers intertwined with hers. "To Janelle," Marcus said, and his voice softened with such tenderness that fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, carving new paths through the ones that had barely dried. "My love, my heart, you carried such a heavy burden for me. You risked everything to honor my wishes. I know what this has cost you, and I'm so sorry for asking such an impossible thing. But you need to know, you need to understand, that what you did was an act of pure love." Sarah had stopped writing, her pen frozen mid-word as she listened, clearly moved by the raw emotion pouring from the screen, her professional mask slipping to reveal the human beneath. "I love you, Janelle Marie Bishop," Marcus said, his own eyes glistening like morning dew. "I loved you from the moment I met you, and I'll love you long after I'm gone. You gave me peace when I needed it most. You gave me dignity when my body was betraying me. You gave me freedom when I was trapped. Don't let anyone tell you different." He reached toward the camera, as if trying to touch her across time and space, his fingers trembling with the effort. The video continued for a few more minutes, Marcus providing specific details about his condition, his mental state, the conversations he'd had with doctors. Sarah's pen flew across her legal pad, capturing every word, the scratching sound a counterpoint to Marcus's weakened voice. But Janelle barely heard any of it. She was lost in Marcus's face, his voice, the love that radiated from him even through a screen. For those precious moments he was alive again, speaking directly to her heart, bridging the gap between life and death. When the video finally ended, the silence in the room was deafening, like the moment after a thunderclap. Sarah looked at Janelle, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and hope. "This changes everything," she said, already gathering her notes. "We're filing an emergency motion now." Her movements were quick, purposeful, energized by new possibility, like a spark igniting dry kindling. Janelle's fingers dug into the table's edge as she whispered, "Please hurry." The words felt inadequate for the storm of emotions inside her, but they were all she could manage. Marcus's voice still echoed in her mind, wrapping around her heart like a protective shield against whatever was to come. For the first time since that terrible night, a tiny flicker of hope sparked to life inside her. Fragile, but undeniable. Like the first star appearing in an evening sky. Sarah's heels clicked rapidly against the marble floor of her downtown office building. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, but she barely noticed. Her mind was racing faster than her feet as she clutched her laptop bag and the precious flash drive that contained what might be Janelle's only hope. Inside her office, she flipped on the lights and immediately powered up her computer. The clock on the wall showed 7:45 p.m. Every minute counted now. She pulled up the emergency motion template she'd prepared earlier and began typing furiously, her heart pounding in her chest. "Your Honor," she muttered under her breath as she wrote, "this newly discovered evidence fundamentally changes the nature of this case." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, legal terminology flowing naturally after years of practice. But this wasn't just another motion. This was Janelle's life hanging in the balance. The words had to be perfect, convincing, impossible to ignore. Sarah paused for just a moment, rubbing her tired eyes before diving back in with renewed determination. Meanwhile, in her cell, Janelle sat on the edge of her narrow bed, hands clasped tightly in her lap until her knuckles turned white. The concrete walls seemed to close in around her as she waited, each breath measured and deliberate. The flash drive had contained everything she'd never been able to say. Marcus's face, his voice, his truth. It was all there, finally. But would it be enough to save her? Would anyone believe? The question echoed in her mind like a desperate prayer. She stood up and began pacing, 5 steps one way, turn, 5 steps back, a ritual that had become second nature during her confinement. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a sound she usually tuned out but now seemed deafening in the quiet of the evening. like the persistent buzz of anxiety itself. She pressed her palms against her temples, trying to quiet the storm of thoughts swirling through her mind. Back in her office, Sarah attached Darius's sworn affidavit to the motion. His statement was clear and direct. He had recorded the video with his son. He had kept it safe all this time, and he could verify its authenticity beyond any doubt. She also included the prison visitation logs, proving the timeline of events down to the minute. With trembling fingers, she uploaded the video file itself, Marcus's final testimony. The file upload bar inched forward, each percentage point a small victory in this desperate race against time. "Please," she whispered as she clicked submit on the electronic filing system, a prayer more than a command. "Please let this work." She reached for her phone, calling in favors from colleagues she'd known for years, her voice urgent but determined. "Tom, I need your help getting this expedited. Janet, please. This is literally life or death. Mark, I know it's late, but I wouldn't ask if it wasn't crucial." With each call, she felt a tiny spark of hope ignite as her colleagues rallied around her cause. The night crawled by like a wounded animal. Janelle couldn't sleep, not even for a moment. She watched shadows move across her cell wall as security lights swept past her window, creating patterns that seemed to tell stories of their own. Each time footsteps passed her door, her heart jumped, wondering if there was news, if something had changed, if someone had listened. She traced the outline of Marcus's face in her memory, remembering the warmth of his smile, the gentle strength in his eyes. At 3:45 a.m., the prison warden received the court notice, his face grave as he read it. By 5 a.m., as the sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn, a guard appeared at Janelle's cell, keys jingling at his belt. "Bishop," he said, his voice unusually gentle, almost respectful. "Court hearing at 9 a.m. today." Janelle's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She steadied herself against the wall, nodding her understanding, afraid to speak lest her voice betray the storm of emotions inside her. Her fingers pressed against the cool concrete, anchoring her to reality when everything felt suddenly unreal. Within the hour, Sarah called, her voice crackling through the line. The guard allowed Janelle to take the call at the secure phone station, standing a respectful distance away. "Listen carefully," Sarah said, her voice both excited and professionally measured. "The judge has agreed to review the new evidence in an emergency hearing. We'll present the video, and Darius will testify to its authenticity. You'll be there, but you won't need to speak unless directly questioned by the judge." "What are our chances?" Janelle asked softly, hardly daring to form the words. "This is significant evidence, Janelle. It's Marcus himself corroborating your story. That's huge." Sarah paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But I don't want to make any promises. Just stay strong. We're closer than we've ever been." The hope in Sarah's voice was like a lifeline thrown across the miles between them. After the call, Janelle returned to her cell, her movements mechanical. To her surprise, Officer Lila Keene appeared with a breakfast tray. On it was an extra orange, a small gesture that brought unexpected tears to Janelle's eyes, a tiny kindness in a place where kindness was rare. "Thought you might need the energy," Officer Keene said quietly, her eyes meeting Janelle's briefly before she left without waiting for a response. That simple act of humanity felt like a blessing in the sterile prison environment. Janelle sat on her bed, the orange in her hands, its weight and texture suddenly profound. She closed her eyes, feeling its coolness against her palms. She didn't pray for freedom. That felt too big, too selfish somehow. Instead, she prayed for truth, for Marcus's voice to be heard at last, for understanding to penetrate hearts that had been closed to her story. The sweet citrus scent filled her nostrils as she carefully peeled back the skin, a small ritual of normalcy in this most abnormal of days. "Lord," she whispered, her words barely audible even to herself, "let them see. Let them finally see what was in my heart." The sunrise painted her cell walls in soft pink and gold, colors she hadn't truly noticed in months. Guards arrived with shackles, a procedure she'd been through countless times before, but today felt different, charged with possibility. The metal was just as cold, the chains just as heavy, But as they led her toward the transport van idling in the morning light, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope, fragile but undeniable. Standing at the van's open door, Janelle took a deep breath of the cool morning air, filling her lungs completely. One last chance, she thought, and for the first time, those words held promise instead of despair. The guards helped her into the van, the chains clinking softly like wind chimes. Through the barred windows, she could see the sun continuing its climb into the sky, painting the world in shades of new beginnings. The engine rumbled beneath her, ready to carry her toward whatever fate awaited in that courtroom, where Marcus's truth would finally be heard. Janelle closed her eyes, feeling the vehicle begin to move, carrying her toward a moment that could change everything. The heavy wooden doors of courtroom 312 creaked open at precisely 9 a.m. Janelle Bishop entered through the side entrance, her small frame dwarfed by the two armed officers who flanked her. The metal chains around her wrists and ankles clinked softly with each measured step she took. Despite the weight of the restraints, she walked with quiet dignity, her chin lifted, eyes fixed straight ahead. Not once did she glance at the spectators, as if drawing strength from some private well deep within herself. Her shoulders, though slender, remained squared, a silent refusal to be broken by circumstance. The courtroom was unusually empty for such a high-profile case. A few rows of wooden benches sat mostly vacant, occupied only by a handful of legal staff, court security, and two journalists who scribbled furiously in their notepads. The morning sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor and illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny messengers of hope. The room smelled of lemon polish and the faint mustiness that seemed to cling to all places of judgment. Sarah Yates stood at the defense table, her navy blazer slightly wrinkled from a sleepless night of preparation. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, telling the story of countless hours poring over legal precedents. She watched Janelle approach, trying to project confidence through her tired eyes. As Janelle took her seat, Sarah gave her hand a quick squeeze under the table, a small gesture that spoke volumes in the sterile courtroom. It was their secret language now, these tiny moments of human connection. Judge Ellen Rivera entered from her chambers, her black robe swishing as she ascended to the bench. She was a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. Her face bore the lines of someone who had spent decades weighing the scales of justice. The courtroom fell instantly silent at her presence. "All rise," called the bailiff, and the sparse audience complied with a rustle of movement. "Be seated," Judge Rivera said, adjusting her microphone with practiced precision. "We're here this morning to consider the defense's emergency motion to admit new evidence in the case of State versus Bishop." She peered over her glasses at Sarah, her gaze sharp and assessing like a hawk studying potential prey. "Ms. Yates, you may proceed." Sarah rose, smoothing her blazer with slightly trembling hands. "Your Honor, what we present today isn't just new evidence. It's the truth this court has been seeking." She gestured to the video screen that had been wheeled into the courtroom, her voice gaining strength with each word. "We have direct testimony from Marcus Dean himself, recorded before his death, that clearly states his wishes and validates my client's actions. This is his voice, his choice, his final testament." Her words rang with conviction that seemed to fill every corner of the room. The judge nodded to the court technician and the room darkened slightly as the video began to play. Marcus's gaunt face filled the screen, his once bright eyes now shadowed with pain but still somehow determined. The hollows in his cheeks told the story of his suffering better than any medical report could. His collar hung loose around his neck, a silent testament to how much weight his illness had stolen. His voice came through clearly, though strained. "If you're seeing this, then the worst has already happened. I need everyone to understand. I asked Janelle to help me. The pain, it wasn't just physical anymore. It was stealing who I was piece by piece. What she did, she didn't kill me. She saved me from being erased. She gave me the only freedom I had left." Janelle sat perfectly still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap until the knuckles turned white. She'd seen the video before, But hearing Marcus's voice echo through the courtroom made her heart clench with both love and loss. A single tear formed at the corner of her eye, but she didn't let it fall. She noticed one of the journalists dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, the woman's professional detachment momentarily crumbling in the face of such raw humanity. The moment the clip ended, District Attorney Peterson shot to his feet like a spring uncoiling. "Objection, Your Honor. This video is completely inadmissible." His face was flushed with indignation, a vein throbbing at his temple. There's no timestamp, no chain of custody, no way to verify Mr. Dean's mental state or condition when this was recorded. For all we know, this could have been filmed under duress or altered. We cannot base judicial decisions on emotional appeals. His voice carried the righteous certainty of someone who believed rules mattered more than people. Judge Rivera held up her hand, palm out. "Mr. Peterson, let's hear from the defense before making determinations." Her tone was measured but firm, brooking no argument. Sarah called Darius Leonard to the stand. He looked uncomfortable in his wrinkled suit that seemed a size too large, but spoke with quiet certainty that filled the room. His weathered hands fidgeted with his tie as he settled into the witness box. "Marcus gave me that flash drive himself, 3 weeks before he died. He made me promise to keep it safe, to bring it forward if Janelle ever needed it. That's my son on that video, speaking his own truth with his own voice. I'd know it anywhere." "And you can verify the date this was recorded?" Sarah asked, standing close to the witness box, her posture conveying support. "It was the last time I saw him alive, October 12th. I remember because it was my birthday." Darius's voice cracked slightly, and he cleared his throat before continuing. "He said it was his last chance to give me something meaningful, said I'd understand when the time came." His eyes drifted to Janelle, carrying decades of regret and a desperate hope for redemption. The prosecutor's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned Darius about his years of estrangement from Marcus, his absence during the trial, why he waited until now to come forward. Each question landed like a blow, but Darius absorbed them, answering honestly about his failures as a father and his desire to honor his son's final request, however late it might be. His shoulders hunched further with each admission, but his voice never wavered. Sarah made her final appeal to the judge, her voice passionate but controlled, hands gesturing with purpose. "Your Honor, this isn't about technical perfection. It's about justice. It's about truth. Marcus Dean's voice deserves to be heard in this courtroom where his life and death are being judged. To silence him now would be a second tragedy." She looked directly at Janelle as she finished, a silent promise that she had done everything possible. Judge Rivera removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose where deep indentations marked years of wearing them. The courtroom fell silent as she considered, the weight of her decision hanging in the air like a physical presence. Even the usual creaks of the old building seemed to pause in anticipation. Janelle held her breath, her heart hammering so loud she was sure everyone could hear it, each beat counting down to a verdict that would determine everything. Finally, Judge Rivera spoke, her voice heavy with regret that seemed to age her further. "Ms. Yates, while I appreciate the significance of this evidence, the law sets clear standards for admissibility. Without proper authentication, without clear documentation of when and how this video was created, I cannot allow it to be entered into evidence." She paused, looking directly at Janelle with eyes that held compassion, but no mercy. "I'm sorry, Ms. Bishop, but the law demands more than testimony. Your motion is denied." The words fell like stones in the quiet courtroom, each one building a wall between Janelle and freedom. Janelle didn't move, didn't blink, as if suspended in that moment of devastating clarity. The officers stepped forward ready to escort her out, and she rose mechanically from her chair. Her face remained perfectly still, a mask of composure that betrayed none of the crumbling happening inside, where hope had briefly bloomed only to wither under the harsh light of legal procedure. Her soul, however, remained unbroken, a silent victory that no court could take away. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Janelle shuffled back into her cell, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The guards' footsteps echoed down the corridor, but their usual chatter was absent. Even they seemed to understand the weight of what had happened in that courtroom. The heavy metal door clanged shut behind her with a finality that made her flinch. She stood there motionless, staring at the gray concrete walls that had become her world. The small window high above cast weak afternoon shadows across the floor, but Janelle barely noticed. Her chest felt hollow, as if someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that had been keeping her going. The hope she'd carefully nurtured since Darius's visit had shattered, leaving nothing but sharp edges that cut with every breath. Hours passed, marked only by the slow crawl of sunlight across her cell floor. Janelle sat perched on the edge of her thin mattress, her hands folded in her lap. So still she might have been carved from stone. The sounds of the prison, muffled conversations, distant laughter, the occasional shout, filtered through her door, but none of it reached her. The dinner cart rattled down the hall, and a tray was pushed through the slot in her door. The smell of bland institutional food filled the small space. Something inside her snapped. With a sudden burst of movement, Janelle grabbed the plastic tray and hurled it against the wall. The sound of it hitting concrete was deeply satisfying. Mashed potatoes and green beans splattered across the gray surface, sliding down in ugly streaks. A guttural scream tore from her throat, raw and primal, filled with all the rage and despair she'd been holding back. Her fists found the steel wall next, pounding against it until her knuckles stung and reddened. She clawed at her mattress, ripping at the thin fabric, needing to destroy something, anything. Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed, the sound echoing off the walls. Her throat burned, but she couldn't stop. She didn't want to stop. Years of quiet dignity crumbled in those moments, washing away in a flood of grief too powerful to contain. The guards didn't come running. There was no shout for her to calm down, no threat of consequences. They gave her this moment of breakdown, this space to finally let go of the composure she'd maintained for so long. As her energy drained away, Janelle slid to the floor, her back against the metal frame of her bunk. Her chest heaved with ragged breaths. In the quiet that followed her outburst, memories flooded in, sharp and vivid as photographs. Marcus's face swam before her eyes, gaunt and gray in those final days. She could see every detail with painful clarity. The way his skin had stretched too tight across his cheekbones, how his eyes had sunken deep into their sockets, the blue veins visible beneath his paper-thin skin. But most of all, she remembered his gaze in that last moment. There had been fear there, yes, but also relief, trust, love. The memory of his last breath hit her like a physical blow. The way his chest had risen, held, and then slowly fallen. The gentle release of air that carried with it all his pain, all his suffering. The terrible, beautiful peace that had settled over his features. "I was strong enough for you," she whispered into the empty cell, her voice cracking. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "Why can't I be strong enough for me?" Her fingers found the edge of the metal bunk, gripping it until her knuckles turned white. The cold floor beneath her offered no comfort as she curled into herself, making her body as small as possible. The mess from her dinner tray dried on the wall, but she couldn't bring herself to care. The smell of institutional food turned sour in the still air. Time lost all meaning. She stayed there, curled on the floor, as the natural light faded from her window and the artificial lights hummed overhead. Other inmates called out to each other, their voices distant and meaningless. A few called her name, but she couldn't summon the strength to answer. The evening medication cart made its rounds, wheels squeaking on linoleum. Still, Janelle didn't move. At 8 p.m., the lights dimmed, casting the cell in shadows. The darkness felt appropriate, matching the emptiness inside her. Her lips were dry and cracked when she finally spoke again, her words barely a whisper in the gathering dark. "Why did I save you if I can't save me?" The morning sun cast long shadows through the narrow window of Janelle's cell. When the guard came to escort her to the legal room, her steps were heavy, weighed down by yesterday's defeat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she entered, finding Sarah already seated at the metal table, papers spread before her like battlefield plans for a war they were losing. Sarah's face showed the strain of sleepless nights, but her eyes held a determined spark. She straightened up as Janelle took her seat, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear with ink-stained fingers. "We're not done," Sarah said firmly, shuffling through her documents with renewed purpose. "We have one last move. We're going straight to the state Supreme Court." Janelle's hands twisted in her lap, her knuckles turning white. "After yesterday." "This is different," Sarah cut in, leaning forward with such intensity that Janelle could smell the coffee on her breath. "We're not focusing on the video anymore. Instead, we're requesting a stay based on Marcus's medical directive, the one he mentioned in the recording." Janelle's brow furrowed, a tiny flicker of hope trying to catch flame. "But we don't have it." "That's exactly why we need the stay," Sarah explained, tapping her pen against the table in a nervous rhythm. "If the court grants us a delay, we can do a thorough search of the hospital archives. There's a chance it was filed but misfiled or stored in an old record system that nobody bothered to check." The fluorescent light flickered, casting intermittent shadows across Sarah's tired face, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. "I know it's a long shot," she admitted, her voice softening. "But we have to try. We have 72 hours left." Janelle nodded slowly, but something had shifted in her expression. A quiet acceptance had settled over her features, like still water after a storm. The fight hadn't left her, but something else had taken its place, a peace she couldn't quite explain. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything you've done." Back in her cell, Janelle sat at the small metal desk bolted to the wall, its surface scratched with years of other women's desperation. She pulled out 3 sheets of paper and a stubby pencil worn down by countless other hands. Her hand hovered over the first blank page as memories flooded her mind, washing over her like baptismal waters. The letter to her mother came first. "Dear Mama," she wrote, the words flowing slowly but steadily from some deep place inside her. She didn't try to defend herself or beg for understanding. Instead, she wrote about the little girl who used to sing in church, who always wanted to make her mama proud. She wrote about the woman she'd become, about love and impossible choices made in the darkest hours. "I know you may never forgive me," she wrote, her pencil pressing harder into the paper, "but I hope someday you'll remember that I'm still your daughter, the same one who used to sleep with her head on your lap during long sermons." The second letter was for Damon. Her hand trembled as she began. "Big brother," she wrote, remembering the boy who used to chase away playground bullies, who taught her to ride a bike without training wheels, who went off to war and came back different, harder on the outside, more fragile within. She wrote about understanding his anger now, about wishing things could have been different for all of them. "I know you wanted to protect me," she wrote, a tear splashing onto the paper, blurring the words. "But sometimes love means letting go when holding on would be easier." The final letter was the hardest. "Marcus," she began, then stopped, tears blurring her vision until the page was just a white smudge. She wiped them away with the back of her hand and continued, her heart breaking open with each word. She wrote about their first date at the county fair, about planning their future in whispered conversations, about holding his hand through endless hospital nights when pain was his only constant companion. She wrote about the moment he asked her to help him die, about the weight of that choice, about the peace in his eyes at the end when suffering finally released him. "I would choose you again," she wrote, her hand steady now despite the tears. "Every time in every life we might have had." Outside her cell, life in the prison continued its mechanical rhythm. She could hear the distant clang of doors, the shuffle of feet on concrete floors, the murmur of voices rising and falling like waves. Sarah's deadline approached, 2 p.m. for the Supreme Court filing. Janelle imagined her attorney hunched over her desk, fighting against time, and a system designed to move with glacial slowness. The afternoon light slanted through her window as Janelle read each letter again. She didn't ask for forgiveness or try to justify her actions. She simply told her truth, about love, about loss, about choices that break your heart but save your soul from something worse than death. Her hands shook slightly as she folded each letter with careful precision, creasing the edges firmly between her fingers. She slipped them into the plain white envelopes provided by the prison, writing each name in her neat handwriting, Ruthie Bishop, Damon Bishop, Marcus Dean. The last one would never be delivered, but somehow that didn't matter. The sun was setting when she finished, painting the cell walls in deep orange and purple strokes that no artist could capture. She placed the 3 envelopes on the edge of her narrow cot, running her fingers over the names one last time, a final caress. In the growing darkness, Janelle sat on her bed and whispered into the silence, "I have nothing left to say, and maybe that's okay." The letters lay still in the fading light, holding all the words she'd never spoken, all the truth she needed them to know. Whatever came next, whether Sarah's last-ditch effort succeeded or failed, she had said what needed saying, and in that moment it was enough. The morning sun hadn't yet reached Janelle's window when Officer Martinez approached her cell. His boots made soft clicks against the concrete floor, echoing in the quiet corridor. Janelle sat on her bed, 3 white envelopes placed neatly beside her. Each one bore a name written in her careful handwriting, the letters formed with deliberate precision despite her trembling fingers. "Mail pickup," Martinez announced, his voice gentler than usual. He'd been different since the court hearing, less rigid somehow. The hard edges of his official demeanor had softened, as if her story had found its way past his uniform. Janelle nodded and handed the letters through the slot. Her fingers lingered on the edges for a moment before letting go, as though reluctant to part with these final pieces of herself. Martinez noticed how her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained calm, a mask of acceptance that hid the storm within. "They'll go out with today's batch," he said, tucking them into his collection tray. He hesitated, wanting to say more but bound by professional distance. "Thank you," Janelle whispered, her voice barely audible, like a leaf brushing against concrete. She turned away from the door and faced the wall, arms wrapped around herself like a shield against the emptiness that threatened to consume her. The morning light grew stronger as the letters made their journey. In the prison's mailroom, they were sorted, stamped, and sent on their way to 3 different destinations, carrying Janelle's heart in paper envelopes. The first letter arrived at Ruthie Bishop's house, tucked between pages of The Good Word, her church's weekly newsletter. She stood at her front door, sorting through the mail with practiced efficiency until her fingers froze on the familiar handwriting, the sight of it like a physical blow. Her chest tightened. The envelope felt like it was burning her skin, branded with shame and sin. Ruthie's hands shook as she tore it open, her eyes falling on the first line. "Mama, I know you think I've betrayed everything you taught me." Something snapped inside her. With a sharp intake of breath, she ripped the letter in half, then again, until the pieces fluttered like wounded birds around her feet. The words of her only daughter scattered like ashes before they could take root. "Lord, give me strength," she hissed through clenched teeth, marching to the fireplace. The morning fire still smoldered from her prayer time, embers glowing like angry eyes. She threw the fragments in, watching them curl and blacken, destroying the evidence of her own failure. "Deliver me from evil," she whispered, but her voice cracked on the last word, betraying the mother beneath the deaconess. She turned away before she could see the ashes of her daughter's last words float up the chimney, carrying unread forgiveness into the morning sky. Across town, Sarah, Damon's girlfriend, picked up their mail. She found Janelle's letter mixed in with bills and advertisements, instantly recognizing the handwriting. When Damon came home from his shift at the security firm, she held it out to him, her eyes gentle but firm. "It came today," she said softly. "You don't have to open it, but you'll regret it if you don't. Some words can't wait forever." Damon stood in their small kitchen, still in his uniform, his jaw clenched as he stared at the envelope, as if it contained a bomb rather than words. The muscles in his neck tensed, and his breathing grew heavy, the soldier in him battling the brother. A full minute passed before his fingers crushed the letter into a tight ball. "I can't," he growled, throwing it toward the trash can. It bounced off the rim and rolled under the table, refusing to be discarded so easily. Sarah said nothing, just squeezed his arm and left him alone. She knew him well enough to wait, to let the storm inside him settle before the truth could break through. 10 minutes later, Damon came back. He knelt down, retrieved the crumpled envelope, and smoothed it out on the kitchen table, his large hands suddenly gentle. but he couldn't bring himself to break the seal. The letter sat there like an unexploded mine waiting for courage to disarm it. In a cheap motel room on the outskirts of town, Darius Leonard sat on the edge of a sagging bed. The envelope rested in his weathered hands, a stark white against his dark skin. Unlike the others, he opened it immediately, carefully, as if handling something precious. A final gift from someone who had nothing left to give. The letter wasn't long. Darius read each word slowly, tears rolling down his face and disappearing into his graying beard. He didn't wipe them away, wearing his grief like a badge of honor. "Dear Darius," it began. "Thank you for being the only person who came without demands. For listening when everyone else was shouting. For understanding that sometimes love looks like goodbye." His shoulders shook, but no sound escaped him. The silence in the room felt holy somehow, like a church at midnight, sanctified by shared pain and understanding. The letter ended with a simple truth. "You gave Marcus peace by accepting his choice. And you gave me peace by accepting mine." Darius folded the letter carefully and placed it over his heart, as if to absorb its message directly into his bloodstream. Back in her cell, Janelle lay on her narrow bed, arms crossed over her chest like a pharaoh awaiting judgment. The afternoon light cast long shadows through the bars, striping her face with gold and darkness. She'd given away her last secrets, her final explanations. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to defend. The prison loudspeaker crackled to life, announcing evening head count. Janelle didn't move. Her lips formed words so quiet they barely disturbed the air. "That was the last part of me I had to give." She closed her eyes, feeling strangely light, empty but not in a hollow way. More like a vessel that had poured out everything it held, down to the last drop. The truth of who she was, what she'd done, and why. It was all out there now, scattered like seeds in those 3 letters, waiting to take root in hearts that might never be ready. The guard's footsteps approached for count, then faded away. Janelle remained still, her breathing steady and calm. She had nothing left to give, nothing left to prove. And somehow, in that moment, it felt like enough. In emptiness, she found a strange kind of peace. The morning light cast long shadows through the narrow window of Janelle's cell. She sat perfectly still on her thin mattress, hands folded in her lap, when the sound of multiple footsteps drew her attention. The cell block had gone unusually quiet, as if even the air itself knew something significant was approaching. Warden Chambers appeared before her cell, his tall frame casting a shadow across the concrete floor. 2 guards flanked him, but stayed a respectful distance back, their eyes avoiding direct contact with Janelle. The warden's face was solemn, his usual stern expression softened by something that looked almost like discomfort, maybe even a touch of reluctance. "Ms. Bishop," he said, clearing his throat twice before continuing. "As you know, according to protocol, I'm here to ask if you have any final requests for your last 24 hours. His words hung heavy in the stale prison air. Janelle looked up at him slowly. Her dark eyes were clear and steady, though exhaustion had left deep shadows beneath them, like bruises against her brown skin. She'd known this moment was coming, had turned it over in her mind countless times during sleepless nights when the only company she had were her memories and regrets. The warden waited, his clipboard held loosely at his side, his knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. The silence stretched between them like a living thing, breathing and expanding until it filled every corner of the small cell. Finally, Janelle spoke, her voice quiet but firm, with a certainty that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. "I want to sing again," she said. "Alone. In my cell." The simplicity of her request seemed to make it all the more powerful. Chambers blinked, clearly taken aback. Of all the requests he'd expected, special meals, phone calls, visits from family, this wasn't one of them. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing briefly at the guards behind him as if seeking guidance. "Just that?" he asked, unable to hide his surprise. Janelle nodded once decisively. "Just that." Her hands remained perfectly still in her lap. The warden studied her face for a long moment, then made a note on his clipboard. the scratch of his pen unnaturally loud. "I'll need to clear the tier for security purposes," he said. "But I can arrange 15 minutes this evening, before lights out." There was something in his tone that suggested he understood, at least partially, the importance of her request. "Thank you," Janelle said simply, her words carrying genuine gratitude despite their brevity. As Chambers turned to leave, he paused, one hand resting on the cell bars. Something in Janelle's calm acceptance seemed to affect him deeply. His shoulders dropped slightly, and he nodded once. Not the formal nod of a prison official, but something more personal, more human, almost like acknowledgement between equals. The day passed slowly, each minute stretching like taffy. Janelle barely touched her meals, the food turning cold on the plastic tray. She spent most of her time sitting quietly or pacing the small space of her cell, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. The other inmates seemed to sense something different in the air. Conversations were muted, movements more careful, as if everyone was walking on glass. As evening approached, Officer Lila Keene appeared at Janelle's cell. The young guard's face was drawn, her usual professional mask slipping slightly as she unlocked the food slot with trembling fingers. She slipped a small folded paper through the opening, her eyes briefly meeting Janelle's. "Thought you might want this," Lila said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, like she was sharing a secret. Janelle unfolded the paper to find the lyrics to "It Is Well With My Soul" printed in neat handwriting, each letter carefully formed. A small smile touched her lips as she ran her fingers over the words she already knew by heart, words that had sustained her through the darkest nights. "Thank you, Officer Keene," she said, the paper delicate between her fingers. Lila lingered for a moment, her hand resting on the cell door. She started, then stopped, swallowing hard as if fighting against something rising in her throat. Finally, she just nodded and walked away, her steps quick and uneven, echoing down the corridor. At exactly 8:45 p.m., the tier fell silent. The usual evening sounds, television murmurs, quiet conversations, the shuffle of cards, all ceased, as if someone had pressed a universal mute button. Janelle stood in the center of her cell, the paper still clutched in her hand, though she didn't need it, a talisman more than a guide. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath that filled her lungs completely, and began to sing. Her voice was different from the last time, heavier, worn by grief and exhaustion, like velvet that had been left in the rain. The familiar words came slower, each one weighted with meaning and memory. But there was still strength there, still beauty, still something unbreakable at its core that seemed to defy the concrete walls surrounding her. The sound filled the narrow space of her cell and spilled out into the corridor like water finding its way through cracks. In the cell next door, someone began to cry softly, not loud sobs, but quiet tears that seemed to fall in rhythm with Janelle's song, a counterpoint to her melody. Outside in the hallway, a young guard, barely out of training, his uniform still stiff and new, leaned against the wall. His face was turned away from the other officers, but they could see his shoulders trembling slightly, betraying emotions he wasn't yet skilled at hiding. Janelle's voice carried the hymn to its end, the final note hanging in the air like a prayer seeking heaven. When silence fell again, she lowered her head, eyes still closed, hands now open at her sides. "Now I'm ready," she whispered, the words meant for herself alone. The cell block remained absolutely still, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Even the harsh fluorescent lights seemed to have dimmed, leaving Janelle standing in her cell like a figure in a painting, solitary, dignified, at peace with whatever morning would bring. Officer Keene stood at her post, one hand pressed against her mouth, tears running freely down her face, carving shining paths on her cheeks. The young guard who had been leaning against the wall straightened up slowly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand before walking away with unsteady steps, his boots unusually loud in the silence. In the next cell, the crying had stopped, replaced by a kind of reverent silence that felt almost holy. Through the small window, the last rays of sunset painted orange streaks across Janelle's cell floor, touching everything with gentle, fading light, the bed, the sink, Janelle herself, as if offering one final blessing before night fell completely. The harsh fluorescent lights flickered on in Janelle's cell at exactly 5 a.m. Officer Lila Keene's familiar silhouette appeared at the door, her shoulders tense, but her voice gentle. "It's time, Janelle," she said softly, the words hanging heavy in the still morning air. Janelle had been awake for hours already, lying still on her thin mattress, watching shadows dance across the ceiling. The night had stretched endlessly, filled with memories and quiet acceptance. She sat up slowly, her movements deliberate and calm. Her heart should have been racing, she thought, but instead it beat with an odd steadiness, like a metronome counting down her final hours. "The shower's ready for you," Lila continued, unlocking the cell door with a soft click. "Take as long as you need." Her eyes held a mixture of professional distance and unmistakable compassion. The corridor was eerily quiet as Janelle walked to the shower room, her bare feet barely making a sound on the cold concrete floor. The usual morning chaos of the prison was absent. No shouting, no metal doors clanging, no officers barking orders. It felt like the whole building was holding its breath, as if even the walls understood the gravity of this day. The shower room was empty, steam rising from the single running shower head like ghostly fingers reaching upward. A fresh towel and basic toiletries had been laid out with unusual care. Janelle stepped under the hot water and closed her eyes, letting it run over her face. She thought of rain, of baptisms, of cleansing, of Marcus. Her hands moved automatically through the motions of washing, muscle memory taking over while her mind drifted to places beyond these walls. Back in her cell, a pristine white jumpsuit was waiting, folded with careful precision on her bed. The fabric felt stiff and new against her skin as she dressed, so different from the worn orange uniform that had become her second skin. She caught a glimpse of herself in the small metal mirror above her sink. She looked different somehow, almost translucent in the white fabric, like she was already beginning to fade away, becoming something between solid and spirit. Officer Keene returned with a small breakfast tray, but Janelle shook her head. "Just water, please," she said, her voice clear and steady, surprising even herself. Lila nodded, returning moments later with a paper cup of cool water. Janelle sipped it slowly, savoring the simple sensation of coolness against her throat, one of life's final small pleasures. The morning procedures moved forward with mechanical efficiency, but there was an undercurrent of hesitation in every action. The guards spoke in whispers, their movements slower and more careful than usual. When they brought her the slip of paper to sign, Janelle noticed how they watched her hands, perhaps expecting them to tremble. But when she picked up the pen, her signature flowed smooth and sure across the paper, a final affirmation of her choices. "Ready?" Lila asked, standing at the cell door one final time, her knuckles white against the dark metal. Janelle stood, smoothing the front of her jumpsuit. "Yes," she said simply, the word containing worlds of meaning. The walk down the corridor felt both eternal and impossibly brief. Her escort of guards moved in perfect formation around her, their footsteps echoing in the hushed space like a solemn drumbeat. Other inmates pressed against their cell doors as she passed, some offering quiet prayers, others standing in respectful silence, many with tears streaming down hardened faces. The death chamber waited at the end of the hall, its clinical whiteness spilling out into the corridor like spilled milk. Janelle paused for just a moment at the threshold, taking a deep breath that filled her lungs completely. Through the observation window, she could see the small gathering of witnesses. Her mother's absence felt like a physical thing, a hollow space in the air that ached with each heartbeat. But Damon was there, his jaw clenched tight, his military posture rigid with tension. Behind him stood Darius, his weathered face streaked with silent tears, but his eyes filled with a fierce sort of pride that spoke of understanding beyond judgment. The room smelled of antiseptic and new paint. Everything gleamed under the harsh lights, the straps, the chair, the various medical implements arranged with terrible precision. Two technicians in white coats moved with practiced efficiency, checking and double-checking their equipment, avoiding her eyes until the last possible moment. Warden Chambers stood to one side, his usual authoritative presence somewhat diminished. When Janelle met his eyes, he gave her a small nod. Not the impersonal acknowledgement of an official, but the genuine respect of one human being for another in the face of mortality. "Your wrists, please," one of the technicians said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Janelle held out her hands, watching as they secured the soft restraints. The technician's touch was gentle, almost apologetic, his fingers warm against her skin. Through the window, she heard a whispered comment from one of the journalists. "She doesn't look scared." And she wasn't, not really. There was sadness, yes, and a deep ache for all the life she wouldn't get to live. But fear had left her somewhere in the long nights leading up to this moment, replaced by a strange, peaceful certainty. They guided her to the chair, and she sat down without resistance. The straps were secured one by one, ankles, wrists, waist, shoulders. Each click of a buckle echoed in the silent room like thunder. A single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek, but Janelle kept her eyes open, fixed straight ahead. She would not close them. She would not cry. She would face this final moment with the same quiet strength that had carried her this far. Through the window, she saw Damon shift slightly, his stoic expression cracking just for a moment, revealing the raw pain beneath. Behind him, Darius placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. The simple gesture carried more understanding than 1,000 words could have expressed, a silent acknowledgement of shared grief. The technicians moved around her with practiced precision, attaching monitors and checking readings. Their touches were clinical, but not unkind. The room held its collective breath, waiting for what would come next, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Janelle sat perfectly still in the chair, her back straight, her chin lifted. The tear track on her cheek had dried, leaving no trace. Through the window, the small group of witnesses watched as she faced her final moments with quiet dignity, her eyes clear and unwavering, reflecting a peace that transcended her circumstances. The observation room hummed with tense energy at 5:45 a.m. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the faces of the witnesses, making them look like pale ghosts pressed against the glass. The air felt thick, almost electric, as Warden Chambers stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor with each deliberate step. The sound echoed in the silence, a metronome counting down moments that couldn't be reclaimed. Janelle sat perfectly still in the execution chair, her white jumpsuit stark against the dark leather straps that held her in place. Her hands rested limply on the armrests, her fingernails clean and short. The technician moved methodically behind a partition, checking gauges and dials with practiced precision, his face a mask of professional detachment. A low electrical hum filled the chamber, growing steadily louder like an angry swarm of bees, vibrating through the floor and into the bones of everyone present. Warden Chambers cleared his throat and unfolded an official-looking document. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly. His voice, usually commanding, seemed somehow smaller in the cramped space, as if the gravity of the moment had compressed it. "Janelle Marie Bishop, you have been sentenced to death by the state for the crime of first-degree murder. Do you have any final words?" Janelle's eyes remained fixed straight ahead, but her voice carried clearly through the room, steady and without fear. "I'm at peace with my truth." 5 simple words that contained a lifetime of conviction. In the observation room, Damon stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tight, a muscle twitched beneath his skin. His military bearing couldn't quite mask the storm in his eyes as he watched his baby sister. His fists were balled at his sides, knuckles white with strain. Behind him, Darius kept his head lowered, his weathered hands clasped together as if in prayer, the veins standing out like rivers on a map. The technician's movements became more purposeful now. The hum of machinery grew louder, and the air seemed to crackle with invisible energy. Janelle could feel her heartbeat slowing, becoming deeper, more deliberate. Each pulse felt like a countdown of its own, each beat a goodbye to the life she'd known. The empty chair where Sarah Yates should have been seemed to mock them all with its vacancy. She was across town in her office, phone pressed to her ear, waiting for word from the Supreme Court, her desk littered with emergency petitions and legal briefs. But here in this sterile room with its mint green walls and antiseptic smell, time wouldn't wait for legal proceedings. Warden Chambers nodded to the technician who positioned himself by the control panel. "Beginning final countdown. the warden announced, his voice echoing off the bare walls. 5. Janelle's fingers gripped the armrests, not in fear but in acceptance. Her lips moved silently, forming familiar words. When peace like a river attendeth my way. The hymn her mother had sung to her as a child. 4. Damon's breath caught in his throat. For a moment he saw not the woman in the chair, but his little sister running through sprinklers on a hot summer day, her laugh echoing across years of memory, her pigtails bouncing with each joyful step. 3. The low electrical hum seemed to intensify, filling the chamber with its ominous drone. Darius's shoulders shook slightly as he continued to bow his head, unable to watch but unwilling to leave, tears dropping silently onto his clasped hands. 2. Janelle closed her eyes, ready for whatever came next. The room held its collective breath, the tension almost unbearable, like a guitar string pulled too tight and about to snap. Suddenly, the heavy metal door of the execution chamber burst open with a thunderous bang that made everyone jump. A young guard stumbled in, his face flushed red from running, his chest heaving as he gasped for air, a piece of paper clutched in his trembling hand. "Wait!" he shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. "We've got an order!" The technician's hand froze inches from the switch, suspended in the air like a conductor paused mid-symphony. The electrical hum continued its steady drone, but now it seemed to pulse with possibility rather than finality, a heartbeat of hope in a room that had been prepared for death. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the young guard burst through the heavy metal door, his face flushed and breath coming in quick gasps. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he stumbled forward, his boots squeaking against the polished floor. In his trembling hand he clutched an official-looking envelope, its state Supreme Court seal gleaming under the harsh lighting like a beacon of hope. The paper crinkled beneath his tight grip, betraying his nervous energy as he rushed forward, his uniform badge catching the light with each heaving breath. "Wait!" he called out again, his voice echoing off the sterile walls, bouncing back with desperate urgency. "There's an emergency order!" His words hung in the air, charged with importance that everyone in the room could feel down to their bones, a current of electricity that froze them all in place. The world seemed to pause, suspended in that single moment of possibility. Warden Chambers turned from his position, his weathered face showing the first crack in his professional mask. Deep lines appeared around his mouth as his composure wavered, years of practiced stoicism beginning to crumble. The technician's hand froze above the switch, trembling slightly, suspended in the moment between life and death. The silence in the chamber grew thick enough to cut with a knife, broken only by the rapid breathing of those present. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its ticking for a breathless moment, as if time itself recognized the gravity of what was happening in this sterile room. The guard crossed the room in 3 quick strides, his uniform rustling with each step, thrusting the envelope toward the warden. Chambers took it with steady hands that betrayed years of practice in crisis management, though his fingers twitched almost imperceptibly at the corners. The sound of tearing paper seemed to echo through the chamber as he broke the seal, the rip cutting through the tension like a knife. Everyone watched, barely breathing as he unfolded the document within, the paper catching the harsh light as it opened to reveal its contents. The white page seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights, words of authority etched in formal black ink. Janelle remained motionless in the chair, her chest rising and falling in measured breaths. Her dark eyes stayed fixed on a point in the distance, refusing to acknowledge the commotion around her. She didn't dare to hope. Hope had betrayed her too many times before, leaving deeper wounds with each disappointment. But something in the air had shifted, like the moment before a storm breaks, electric with possibility. A tiny muscle in her jaw tightened, the only sign that she was aware of the drama unfolding around her fate. Her hands, resting on the chair's arms, remained perfectly still, though a single bead of sweat traced a path down her temple, marking the passage of these eternal seconds. Inside, her heart pounded against her ribs, a caged bird sensing freedom might be just beyond reach. The death chamber erupted into controlled chaos. Guards and medical personnel swarmed around Janelle's crumpled form on the floor, their movements precise but urgent. Her white jumpsuit pooled around her like spilled milk against the cold concrete, her shoulders heaving with each ragged breath. The harsh fluorescent lights cast shadows across her face, highlighting the shock etched into every feature. "Give her space," Warden Chambers commanded, his voice firm but gentler than usual. The crowd of uniforms stepped back slightly, creating a small circle around her. The air felt charged with tension, heavy with the weight of what had almost happened. A medic with kind eyes knelt beside her, reaching for her wrist. "Ms. Bishop, I need to check your pulse." Janelle didn't resist, but her arm trembled violently in the medic's grip. Her skin felt ice cold to the touch, like marble that had never known the sun. "Blood pressure's dropping," the medic announced, wrapping the cuff around her arm. "She's going into shock. We need to warm her up." His words carried an urgency that made the guards exchange worried glances. 2 guards moved to help her stand, but Janelle's legs wouldn't cooperate. She weakly pushed their hands away, not in defiance, but pure exhaustion. Her body had been preparing for death, and now it didn't know how to prepare for life. Every muscle seemed to have forgotten its purpose. "I can't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't move." The words fell from her lips like broken glass. The female guard, Officer Keene, appeared with a thick wool blanket. She dropped to her knees beside Janelle, draping it around her shoulders with careful movements. "You don't have to move yet," she soothed. "Just breathe." Her voice carried the gentle authority of someone used to calming storms. That's when the dam broke. The first sob tore from Janelle's throat like it was being ripped out, raw and primal. Her whole body shook with the force of it. Gone was the composed young woman who had faced death with dignity. In her place was someone stripped bare, all her carefully constructed walls crumbling at once. Months of contained grief poured out of her like a flash flood. "I thought I was ready," she gasped between sobs, clutching the blanket so tight her knuckles went white. "But I wasn't. I didn't want to die." Each word seemed to cost her something, torn from somewhere deep inside. Through the observation window, Damon stood rigid, his jaw clenched tight as he watched his sister break down. His face betrayed nothing, but his hands were balled into fists at his sides. The military discipline that shaped his posture couldn't hide the storm in his eyes. Without a word, he turned on his heel and walked out, leaving only the echo of his footsteps behind. "Clear the room," Warden Chambers ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Give her privacy." The guards and technicians filed out quietly, leaving only Officer Keene and the medic with Janelle. Their footsteps faded like retreating thunder. "Marcus," she sobbed, rocking slightly. "Marcus, Marcus, Marcus." His name became a mantra, each repetition carrying years of love and loss and pain. The blanket was wrapped around her like a cocoon, but she couldn't stop shaking. Each tremor seemed to come from her very core. Darius lingered by the exit, one hand pressed against the doorframe. Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks, but he made no sound. His eyes never left Janelle's huddled form, as if he was seeing his son's love made visible in her grief. The pain in his expression mirrored her own. The medic spoke quietly to Officer Keene. "Her blood pressure's still too low. We need to get her to the infirmary." He checked his watch, concern deepening the lines around his eyes. Keene nodded and spoke softly to Janelle. "We're going to help you into a wheelchair, okay? Just lean on us." Her tone was the kind reserved for wounded creatures. It took both of them to lift her. Janelle's legs were like rubber, her body spent from the emotional explosion. They settled her into the wheelchair, tucking the blanket more securely around her. The metal chair felt cold even through the layers of fabric. Her sobs had quieted to soft, hiccuping cries, but tears still streamed down her face. These weren't the silent tears of someone accepting death. They were the healing tears of someone being given back their life. Each one carried away a piece of the burden she'd carried for so long. They traced shining paths down her cheeks, dropping onto the blanket like rain. As they wheeled her toward the door, she caught Darius's eye. Something passed between them, understanding perhaps, or shared grief. He stepped aside to let them pass, his presence a silent blessing. His hand briefly rose as if to reach for her before falling back to his side. The wheelchair's wheels squeaked slightly as they moved down the corridor, away from the death chamber. Janelle's soft crying echoed off the walls, but now each tear held a different meaning. She wasn't crying because it was over. She was crying because she had to figure out how to begin again. The future loomed before her, terrifying in its unexpected vastness. Officer Keene kept one hand on Janelle's shoulder as they moved, a steady anchor in the storm of emotions. The medic walked alongside, monitoring her vital signs. The blanket slipped slightly, and Janelle clutched it tighter as if it could shield her from the overwhelming reality of survival. Her fingers dug into the rough wool, searching for something solid to hold onto. They passed through another set of doors, leaving behind the execution chamber with its cold finality. Janelle's tears continued to fall, but her breathing was starting to steady. Each inhale seemed to bring her back to herself, piece by piece as they made their way toward the infirmary. The corridor stretched ahead, bright and sterile, leading her back to a life she never expected to see again. The rain fell in a gentle rhythm, washing away the morning darkness. At exactly 6 a.m., the heavy metal gate of Lakeside Correctional Facility groaned open. Janelle Bishop stepped through, her borrowed sneakers squeaking against the wet pavement. The jeans and hoodie felt strange on her skin after years in prison uniforms. Too soft, too normal, like wearing someone else's life. In her hands, she clutched a clear plastic bag containing her entire world. A well-worn Bible with dog-eared pages, its cover softened from countless hours of seeking comfort. A slightly faded photograph of Marcus smiling at the camera with that crooked grin she'd fallen in love with. And 3 sealed letters she'd never sent, each one holding words too raw to share until now. The raindrops speckled her hoodie, but she didn't mind. After 3 years of concrete and steel, even the cold wetness felt like a blessing. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the fresh morning air that smelled of wet earth and freedom, scents that had existed only in her dreams for too long. The parking lot was empty except for a single dark sedan. No news crews with their bright lights and shouting questions. No protesters with their signs and judgment. Just one tall figure standing beside the car holding a black umbrella. Damon. Janelle's steps faltered for a moment. Her brother's face was unreadable, his jaw set in that familiar rigid line she remembered from childhood arguments and tough love. He wore his military posture like armor, shoulders squared against the rain as if standing at attention. In the gray morning light, she could see the new lines around his eyes, the slight graying at his temples that hadn't been there 3 years ago when he'd testified at her trial with that same stone face. She walked toward him slowly, her plastic bag clutched tight against her chest like a shield. Each step felt uncertain, like walking on ice that might crack beneath her weight. The distance between them seemed to stretch forever, filled with all the words they'd never said, all the pain they'd never shared, all the accusations that hung between them like ghosts. When she finally reached him, Damon didn't move to hug her. He didn't smile. He simply lifted the umbrella higher, extending its protection over her head. The gesture was small, but it made Janelle's throat tight with emotion. Even now, after everything, her big brother's first instinct was still to shield her from something, even if it was just the rain. The rain drummed steadily on the umbrella's surface, filling the silence between them with its soft patter. Janelle noticed the crumpled envelope sticking out of his jacket pocket. Her letter, the one she'd written thinking it would be her last words to him before her execution date. The edges were worn, as if he'd handled it many times, folded and unfolded in private moments. But the seal remained unbroken. "Let's go," Damon whispered, his voice rough and low. It was barely audible above the rain, but to Janelle, those 2 words carried the weight of mountains. They began walking to the car together, their footsteps falling into sync out of old habit, a rhythm established in childhood when he'd walk her to school. Damon didn't speak, and neither did Janelle. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was careful, like they were both holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next, afraid to shatter this fragile moment with wrong words. Janelle didn't ask where they were going. After 3 years of having every minute of her life dictated by others, The simple act of following her brother felt like a choice, and that alone was enough. She watched him from the corner of her eye as they walked, noting how his free hand kept drifting to the envelope in his pocket, touching it as if to make sure it was still there, a nervous habit so unlike the brother she remembered. The car waited like a dark island in the rain. Damon opened the passenger door for her, still holding the umbrella steady above her head. Janelle slid into the seat, her plastic bag of belongings settled in her lap like a child. The leather seat felt impossibly soft after years of hard prison benches that had left permanent aches in her bones. Damon closed her door with a soft click, such a gentle sound, so different from the harsh metallic clang of cell doors that had marked her days for 3 years. She ran her fingers along the window, marveling at how easily it moved up and down. No bars, no reinforced glass, just a simple car window that she could open or close at will. For the first time in 3 years, Janelle was no longer locked in. Inside Damon's old silver sedan, raindrops traced irregular patterns down the windows. The wipers moved back and forth in a steady rhythm, clearing sheets of water from the windshield. The dashboard clock glowed a faint green, 6:47 a.m. Neither brother nor sister had spoken since leaving the prison grounds. Janelle sat with her small plastic bag of belongings in her lap, her fingers absently tracing the worn edges of Marcus's photo through the thin material. The car's heater hummed softly, fighting against the morning chill. Her borrowed clothes still felt foreign on her skin, like she was wearing someone else's life. The cotton sweater was too big, the jeans slightly too long, remnants of a donation box that had found their way to her as she prepared for freedom. Damon kept both hands firmly on the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. His military posture hadn't changed, straight-backed, shoulders squared, jaw set. But something in his eyes had softened since yesterday, though he tried to hide it. The hard lines around his mouth had eased just slightly, betraying the emotional storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. The highway stretched ahead of them, empty except for occasional trucks throwing up spray from their wheels. Trees lined both sides of the road, their leaves heavy with rain, creating dark walls of green that blurred as they passed. Janelle leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the passenger window, her breath creating small clouds of fog that grew and faded with each exhale. The world outside seemed clean and new, washed by the rain in a way that made her heart ache. In the rearview mirror, Damon's eyes flickered to his sister's reflection, then back to the road. His throat worked, as if he was chewing on words he couldn't quite swallow. The windshield wipers kept their steady beat. Swish, pause, swish, pause. The rhythm seemed to count the seconds of their shared silence. Finally, Damon cleared his throat. "I hated you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For a long time." His fingers tightened on the wheel. "Because I couldn't save him." Janelle didn't turn from the window. She stayed perfectly still, letting his words hang in the air between them. The only sound was the engine's low rumble and the constant patter of rain. Her reflection showed no reaction, but inside his confession touched something raw and tender. "But you did," Damon added softly, almost to himself. The words seemed to drain something from him. His shoulders slumped slightly, and his grip on the steering wheel loosened. "Marcus," he started, then had to stop and clear his throat again. "Marcus called me before the end." Janelle's reflection in the window didn't change, but her hands stilled on the plastic bag. Her heartbeat quickened, waiting for what would come next. "He wanted to say goodbye," Damon continued. "I saw his name on my phone and—" His voice cracked. "I ignored it. Told myself I'd call him back later, but I never did." He swallowed hard. "That guilt, it's been eating me alive, every day since." Rain drummed on the roof of the car. A semi-truck passed them in the opposite direction, sending a spray of water across their windshield. The wipers cleared it away, revealing the gray morning once more. Finally, Janelle turned from the window. Her voice was soft but steady when she spoke. "You loved him," she said simply. "That's enough." Damon's jaw clenched and unclenched. Without taking his eyes off the road, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, the one she'd sent him from prison. It was crumpled, but unopened, the seal still intact. The blue prison stamp was faded, but her careful handwriting remained clear across the front. He placed it on the console between them. Neither of them touched it. The rain began to ease as they approached a small roadside diner. Its neon open sign glowed dimly in the gray morning light, and a few trucks were parked in the gravel lot. Damon guided the car off the highway and into a parking spot near the entrance. The tires crunched over wet gravel before coming to a stop. He turned off the engine, and suddenly the silence felt heavier without the background noise of wipers and wheels. Water dripped steadily from the diner's metal awning. Through the windows, they could see a few early morning customers hunched over steaming coffee cups. "You can go wherever you want from here," Damon said, staring straight ahead through the windshield. "No pressure." Janelle looked out at the empty road stretching ahead of them. For the first time since stepping out of the prison gates, a small smile touched her lips. The future, uncertain as it was, belonged to her now. The wooden stairs creaked under Janelle's feet as she climbed to the second floor of the old apartment building. The August heat pressed against her skin, making her cotton blouse stick to her back like a damp second skin. Her duffel bag, containing everything she now owned in the world, felt surprisingly light on her shoulder. A strange freedom in having so little left to weigh her down. The hallway was narrow, painted a soft cream color that had faded with time, chipped in places where furniture had scraped against it over the years. Apartment 2B. Her new home. Her new life. Her new name. She turned the key in the lock, hearing the mechanism click with a finality that made her pause, her breath catching in her throat. Inside, the silence wrapped around her like a familiar blanket, both comforting and smothering. Sunlight streamed through the single window, casting long rectangles of golden light across the bare hardwood floor, highlighting every scratch and imperfection. The apartment was small but clean, a studio with just enough room for the basics. A bed pushed against one wall with a thin mattress and plain sheets, a tiny kitchenette in the corner with a 2-burner stove, and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in without bumping your elbows. Janelle set her duffel bag down gently, the sound echoing in the empty space like a whisper in a church. Her footsteps were careful, measured, as she walked to the window, floorboards sighing beneath her weight. Her fingers reached out, touching the clear glass with a reverence that surprised her. No bars, no metal mesh, just clean, clear glass separating her from the world outside. She could see treetops swaying in the breeze, hear distant traffic humming like a lullaby, watch clouds drift across the blue sky like ships on a peaceful ocean. From her bag, she pulled out the photo she'd carried with her through everything. Through the trial, through the sentence, through the endless days that blurred together. Marcus, captured in a moment of pure joy, before the illness had taken hold and hollowed him out. His smile was wide, genuine, his eyes bright with life and possibilities. The picture had been taken at a park, sunlight catching the edges of his face, highlighting his cheekbones and the warmth in his eyes. She ran her thumb across the image, remembering how his laugh used to fill a room, deep and infectious. She placed the photo carefully on the small wooden shelf mounted to the wall, adjusting it until it stood at just the right angle. Next to it, she set a white candle, simple, unscented, its wick still pristine and unburned. A private altar for private memories, for prayers that had no words. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, making her jump slightly, still unused to having personal possessions again. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, the sight of it bringing a flutter of nervous hope. She answered, her voice still unused to casual conversation, scratchy from disuse. "Hello?" "It's done," Sarah said, her voice warm with triumph and relief. "All charges officially vacated. The paperwork's been filed and sealed. You're truly free now, Janelle. Legally and completely." Janelle closed her eyes, letting the words sink in, feeling them settle into her bones. "Thank you," she whispered, throat tight. "For everything." "Take care of yourself," Sarah replied, the smile evident in her voice. "You deserve this chance. Every bit of it." After hanging up, Janelle grabbed her small purse and headed back out, needing to feel the world around her. The local library was only 3 blocks away, a red brick building with wide, welcoming steps and tall windows that reflected the afternoon sun. Inside, the air conditioning hummed a gentle welcome, and the smell of books filled her lungs, paper and binding glue and possibilities. At the front desk, an elderly librarian with kind eyes and silver-rimmed glasses helped her fill out the application, her wrinkled hands patient as Janelle's pen hesitated over certain fields. When asked for her name, Janelle wrote her new one without hesitation, the letters flowing from her pen with surprising ease. The plastic card they gave her felt like a passport to a new world, a thin rectangle of possibility. Back in her apartment, as afternoon faded into evening and shadows lengthened across the floor, Janelle struck a match. The flame danced for a moment before catching the candle's wick, a tiny star born between her fingers. She watched the light flicker across Marcus's photograph, creating shadows that seemed to make his smile move, as if he were breathing again, if only in the dance of light. She sat cross-legged on her bed, a blank journal open in her lap, its spine still stiff and unbroken. The pen felt heavy in her hand, weighted with all that remained unsaid. She'd bought the journal at a small store on her way back from the library. Simple, black with unlined pages that stretched endlessly white. The kind of book that could hold any story, any confession, any truth. For a long time she just stared at the empty page, feeling the vastness of it. Then slowly, deliberately, she began to write. I remember the day he asked me to help him die. The words flowed after that, like a dam breaking, a river finding its course. Her handwriting, shaky at first, grew stronger with each line, more confident as memories poured onto the page. She wrote until her hand cramped, until her fingers bore the indent of the pen, until the light outside turned purple with sunset, and then deepened to indigo. When night finally fell, Janelle lay back on her bed, exhausted but somehow lighter. The sheets were new, still stiff with store creases that pressed patterns into her skin. Through the window, crickets chirped their evening symphony, a sound she hadn't heard in years. A car passed on the street below, its headlights briefly illuminating the ceiling in sweeping arcs before fading away into darkness. She lay there, eyes open, breathing in the quiet like oxygen. No metal doors clanging shut. No guards' footsteps echoing down concrete corridors. No fluorescent lights that never fully darkened, that buzzed in her dreams. Just the sound of her own breath, the distant crickets and the gentle flutter of the candle flame keeping time with her heartbeat. This time there were no tears. She simply breathed, in and out, counting each breath like a gift, a treasure, a miracle. The candle burned steadily beside Marcus's smile, keeping vigil as the night deepened around them. Two old friends facing the darkness together. The morning sun painted golden squares on the sidewalk as Janelle walked down Main Street. Her sandals made soft tapping sounds against the concrete, matching the gentle rhythm of her steps. She'd chosen this quiet Saturday morning to explore her new town, wanting to avoid the weekday bustle of people rushing to work. The air felt fresh and clean, like a blank page waiting to be filled with new memories. The street was lined with brick buildings that spoke of history, a family-owned hardware store with a hand-painted sign, a cozy bookshop with cats lounging in the window, and a cafe where the smell of fresh coffee and pastries drifted onto the street. Flower boxes burst with color beneath windows, and American flags fluttered from several storefronts. Janelle breathed it all in, savoring the simple pleasure of walking freely, of being just another face on the street. After years of confinement, even the most ordinary sights felt like miracles. A gentle breeze carried the sound of voices, harmonizing, lifting, falling in perfect rhythm. Janelle's steps slowed as the melody became clearer. It was coming from a small white church tucked between two larger buildings, its doors propped open to let in the morning air. The stained glass windows caught the sunlight, casting rainbow patterns on the church steps. Her heart caught in her throat as she recognized the opening notes. It is well with my soul. The same hymn she'd sung in her cell, on what she thought would be her last night. The hymn that had given her strength when she had nothing else to hold on to. She stopped walking, rooted to the spot just outside the church doors. The choir's voices floated out, pure and clear, each note striking something deep within her chest. Her hands began to tremble slightly, but not from fear, from something else entirely, a feeling too big for words. A smile tugged at the corners of her mouth as she closed her eyes, letting the familiar words wash over her like baptism waters. The music transported her backward, images flowing through her mind like water. Marcus in his hospital bed, smiling despite the pain, singing old gospel songs with her during their final days together. His voice had been weak but determined, finding strength in the melodies they both loved. The way his fingers had curled around hers, squeezing gently with the little strength he had left. She saw her mother's Bible, worn and dog-eared, sitting on the kitchen table where they'd read together every Sunday morning before everything changed. The gold-leafed pages had caught the light just so, making the edges glow like they held some divine secret. She remembered tracing the delicate pages with her fingertip, finding comfort in verses her mother had underlined in faded blue ink. Then came the memory of the warden's face in that final moment, the shock, the relief, the humanity breaking through his professional mask as he read the Supreme Court order. The countdown that stopped just before 0, the clock that had ticked so loudly in that sterile room, suddenly falling silent as time seemed to stand still. Janelle opened her eyes, tears clinging to her lashes, but her smile remained. "It's not just a song anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the choir's crescendo. The words held new meaning now, speaking of a peace that went beyond simple acceptance, a strength found in surviving the unsurvivable, a testimony written in the darkest hours of her life. The choir's voices swelled toward the final verse, filling the morning air with hope and harmony. Janelle stood still, letting each note settle into her bones, into her memory. This wasn't the desperate prayer of a condemned woman anymore. It was a testimony, a celebration, a reminder that she was still here, still breathing, still able to hear beauty in the world, still able to feel sunshine on her skin and hope in her heart. As the final note hung in the air, pure and perfect, Janelle turned away from the church doors. She walked down the sun-warmed sidewalk, her steps light, humming the melody under her breath. The morning light caught her face as she rounded the corner, warming her skin like a blessing. A small butterfly darted past, its wings catching the light. Each step took her further from the music but closer to something else, a future she never thought she'd have, a life she'd almost lost, a peace she'd finally found. The hymn followed her, not as a ghost of her past but as a companion for whatever lay ahead. And for the first time in years, Janelle felt truly, completely free. The evening settled over the small apartment like a gentle blanket. Janelle sat cross-legged in her favorite spot by the window, her worn leather journal open on her lap. The soft glow from her bedside lamp cast warm shadows across the pages, making the white paper look almost golden. Her tea, chamomile with a touch of honey, sent wisps of steam dancing in the quiet air. The familiar scent reminded her of peaceful moments from before when life was simpler. Outside, rain tapped against the window pane in a steady rhythm. Unlike the angry storms that had rattled her prison cell, this rain felt different, peaceful, like nature itself was whispering lullabies. Each drop traced silvery paths down the glass, creating patterns that reminded her of tears, but not the bitter kind she'd shed so many times before. These were cleansing, washing away old hurts with each gentle patter. Her pen moved slowly across the page, each word carefully chosen. She'd filled nearly half the journal since her release, pouring out memories, fears, and gradually, hope. But tonight felt different. Tonight the words came with a clarity she hadn't felt before. The pages seemed to welcome her thoughts like an old friend waiting to hear her story. "I wasn't saved," she wrote, the letters flowing smoothly. "I was spared, and sometimes that's the greater miracle." The ink gleamed wet on the page, each stroke deliberate and true. Janelle paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. They felt true in a way that made her chest tighten, not with pain, but with understanding. Her eyes grew misty as she looked up from the page, but these weren't tears of sadness. They were the kind that came with revelation, the kind that healed instead of hurt. Her gaze drifted to Marcus's photo on the shelf. He smiled back at her, forever frozen in that moment of health and joy. The corners of his eyes crinkled just the way she remembered, his bright smile radiating the warmth she'd fallen in love with. Janelle reached out, her fingers brushing the frame with butterfly-light touches. The glass was cool beneath her fingertips, but the memory of his warmth lived in her heart. Setting her pen down, Janelle stood and walked to the shelf where she kept her candle. It was a simple white pillar, nothing fancy, but lighting it had become her evening ritual, a way to mark another day of freedom, another day of healing. The match struck with a soft hiss and the flame caught quickly, casting a gentle glow that made Marcus's photo seem to come alive. She watched the tiny flame dance and sway, steady despite the subtle air currents in the room. She watched the flame dance for a moment, thinking about how different survival looked from what she'd imagined. There were no newspaper headlines celebrating her release, no TV interviews or public statements, just quiet moments like this where healing happened in small, private ways, in cups of tea and candle flames, in rain against windows and words in journals. These simple pleasures meant more than any public vindication ever could. Her eyes fell on the blank paper she'd laid out earlier. She'd been thinking about writing to Ruthie, had even composed dozens of opening lines in her head. But now, looking at the empty page, she realized some silences needed to stay silent. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt with words alone. The weight of unspoken things hung between them like an invisible wall. With gentle hands, she folded the paper, tucking it away in her desk drawer. Maybe someday, but not tonight. The rain continued its soft symphony against the glass as Janelle moved around her small apartment, preparing for bed. She straightened her few belongings, washed her teacup, checked that the door was locked. Simple actions that felt like luxury after years of having every moment controlled by others. Each movement was a quiet celebration of freedom, a reminder that she could choose her own rhythm now. Her bed welcomed her with soft sheets and the comfort of choice. She could sleep when she wanted, how she wanted. No more steel bunks or harsh fluorescent lights that never fully dimmed. She reached for the lamp switch, pausing for a moment to watch the candle flame cast its warm glow across Marcus's smile. The familiar curve of his face seemed softer in the flickering light. In the growing darkness, Janelle settled back against her pillow. The rain provided a gentle backdrop to her thoughts, and the candle's light danced on the ceiling, creating shapes that seemed to tell their own stories. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, but it carried all the strength of truth. "It is well with my soul." The words felt like a blanket wrapping around her heart. The words floated in the quiet room, a testament to survival, to healing, to the miracle of being spared, not saved. That suggested something grander, more dramatic. But being spared meant second chances, quiet mornings, and the freedom to find peace in her own time, in her own way. It meant learning to breathe again, to trust again, to live again. The gentle patter of rain continued, nature's own lullaby, as Janelle closed her eyes. The candle flickered, casting shadows that grew softer and softer until they merged with the darkness of night. In that space between waking and dreaming, she felt Marcus's presence like a warm embrace, protecting her dreams as she drifted into sleep. If you enjoyed the story of Janelle, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here. Story of Janelle. I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.